Hello, Super Relaxed Fantasy Club. My name is Luke Arnold, and I'm going to read to you a little piece of The Last Smile in Sunder City, my debut novel that came out earlier this year. The sequel, Dead Man in a Ditch, will be coming out in October. This series follows Fetch Phillips, a kind of depressed alcoholic man for hire in an urban fantasy world where the magic has died. In this first book, his case is to find a missing vampire professor named Edmund Rye. But after taking a couple of hits to the face, Fetch wanders away from the case at hand to go to the governor's mansion and visit an old friend. Here we go. Oh, and I read this in an American accent. It's kind of the style of Fetch, and that's how I played him when I recorded the audiobook. Punchdrunk, I wandered the streets, letting my mind catch up. I told myself I had no destination. I was aimless, adrift. But I wasn't a great liar, even to myself. It was no mistake I ended up where I did. The abandoned mansion looked darker than the rest of the city, even in the early afternoon. Sunder's last governor was an ogre named Lark, who spent 5 years and a fortune of taxpayers' money building himself this home. It wasn't all a waste, though. A constant stream of foreign dignitaries had been lured up the steps to be filled with food and wine before being coerced into some deal by our boisterous leader. Lark was out riding atop a resilient centaur when the magic cracked. The centaur's spine followed suit, and Governor Lark tumbled down on top of him. The story made it back to the city, but never their bodies. Sunder City moved on from governors after that, and the mansion was left unoccupied. Almost. The rusted gates were wrenched closed and falling off their hinges. I dragged them apart with a teeth-grinding screech and slipped between the gap. The thick, knotted spider webs that lined the pathway to the front door settled my heart. No one had been through there in some time, maybe since my last visit, just as I always hoped. I lived with the ever-present fear that some vandal or careless vagrant would stumble up the steps and disturb what was inside. What could I do if they did? I had no way to preserve this place or to keep watch night and day. Oh, I thought about it too often, but that's not what she would have wanted. The front of the mansion sagged like the face of an ancient grandmother, worn and weathered and abandoned. A clay pot on the porch held a long-dead shrub, and as I lifted it up, the branches crumbled into sawdust. Beneath the pot was a key. I could have forced the lock on the rotten door with one hand if I'd wanted to, but I turned it gently, as if the brass itself might crack. The air inside was rich with mulch and wet grass. Light came through the cracked roof, hitting pollen and dust that swirled through the pillars of the once grand entrance hall. Walls, once spotless white, were now carpeted with thick moss. The seemingly indestructible marble staircase had been pulled to pieces by wild roots and weeds. Vines, thick and intertwining, traced the floor and climbed the fixtures. They burrowed between the floorboards or rolled in through doorways, joining together in the center of the room, where they wrapped themselves around what appeared to be a carefully placed centerpiece. I often wondered what it would be like to walk into that house without knowing what I knew. I would probably think I was looking at the most finely carved wooden sculpture ever created. I would be sure that the face of the girl, shaped in pale timber, was an artist's dream if I hadn't seen those cheeks full of color. I would imagine that the hair, flaked in strips of curled bark, was an unreal creation if I'd never let it run through my fingers. I would look at those perfect lips and marvel at the skilled hand that had shaped them out of cold, dead wood if I was spared the memory of the warmth that once poured out of them onto mine. Her arms were wrapped around her stomach like she had a bellyache. She did when it all ended. Her soul was being torn from her body like a page from a book, as her shattering hand struggled to hold herself together. Those fingers, once so gentle, had grown into wild vines that wrapped around her frame, choking her fragile body. Last time, the cracks had been thin, barely noticeable. Now they were spreading. Fractures split her stomach in a dozen places. One major fault line had reached her left breast, cracking it in two. The white nurse's uniform that once covered it was now a rotten mass of brown cotton. I wanted to touch her, I felt my shaking fingers ache with the need to stroke that splintered face. The fear held into my sides. Even the smallest touch could accelerate the decay. This body once contained the strongest spirit the world ever knew. Now, a tap could shatter it to pieces. On windy nights, I would lie awake, seeing her face split and crack in my mind's eye, fearing that the next time I saw her, she'd be nothing but soot and splinters. But there she was, holding on by a hair. Even now, her skin peeling off in sheets, her body a broken stump. She was the toughest damn thing I ever saw. I sat down on the shattered tiles, full of weeds, fearful that even my breath could break her. I looked into eyes that were cold knots of wood and tried to let memory fill them with life. But that kind of magic died when she did. There was a thin vine across her forehead that pulled so tight it pressed a cleft into her skin. I pulled the knife from my belt. I couldn't help it. With a careful slice, the vine snapped free. There was a faint creaking sound, but nothing broke away. The groove across her face was small. In time, it would have cut right through her crown. I took the pitcher of rye out of my pocket and placed it on the floor between us. This guy is missing. It sounds like he might be one of the good ones. I'll find him if I can. His body, if that's all there is. Maybe administer some justice if somebody did him wrong. I was being ridiculous. She'd tell me that if she could. What I wouldn't do for her to laugh at me one more time. Is this what you wanted? She said the same amount of nothing she'd said every time I'd gone by. I pulled my eyes from that frozen face and let my head roll forward. Branches creaked and snapped in the silence. I'd be gone, I whispered to the petrified wood. If I hadn't promised you I'd stay, I'd be gone, one way or another. I don't know whether to thank you or curse you. I just want you to know I'm trying. And there we have a little bit of The Last Smile in Sunder City. It's out by Orbit in the US and UK, Hachette in Australia, and yeah, keep an eye out for Dead Man in a Ditch coming later this year. Thanks for listening and thanks for having me. Cheers.